Hello out there in Radio Land. This is Michael. This is Street Preacher's Corner Podcast. I am not going to talk about anything even vaguely spiritual today. Um, and the timing of me putting this out is very important. If you're hearing this, it is because my last avenue of redress has expired. And the only way I know to process and address the situation that we just went through for the last couple of years, since I no longer have any legal recourse, is just to get the story out. Without giving out too many particulars because I don't know that it would be helpful, I'm going to talk to you about my COVID-19 story. And, let's start this way. So, December of 2020, I caught COVID. Was sick for 3, 4, 5 days, whatever. Felt like terribleness. Actually went and preached the first day that I probably had it and just felt like death, warmed over. Came home, slept a bunch, couldn't eat anything, got better, went back to work. Now, if you recall, back in December 2020, we had been, our country, our world had been in the grips of this thing, and what we found out is that, contrary to what we're being told by the powers that be, this wasn't the Spanish flu of 1917. This wasn't the Black Plague of 1234. This was a flu. And if there were no other things wrong with you, generally speaking, as a very general statement, you would be sick for a few days and you'd be better. It was not certainly something that justified shutting the world down. And as the time goes on, I think we're going to find that the people that shut the world down knew that shutting the world down was not necessary. But I'm like y'all, back in March of 2020, I said, okay, maybe this is a thing, and we'll just hunker down for a bit. And as time went on, and I saw more and more people, at one point, just about everybody I knew had COVID, just like you, probably. And we'd had a couple of people pass away that had other conditions and happened to die while having COVID or happened to die after contracting COVID, but it wasn't the COVID that killed them. But then we also saw horrible, horrible things. Like my stepfather died in August of 2020, and he did not die from COVID, although they tried to put that on his death certificate because, as it turns out, the hospitals get money for that. Boy, that's another layer. But he died of a upper respiratory infection, not COVID. But because of the COVID protocols, he died alone. He died alone. We offered to test. We offered to wear masks. We offered to wear biohazard suits. We could not go see him. So he died alone over nonsense. He didn't have COVID. We didn't have COVID. Turns out well people can't get well people sick. And I know as time goes by, people will forget, because that's how people do. People will forget how insane that period of time was. People will forget how neighbors were calling the police on their neighbors because they weren't wearing a mask. My sister-in-law lives out on the West Coast. They were having cops call. People were out walking their dogs by themselves without a mask on, and the cops were being called, and the cops were responding. There were people that were being. You go back and look. Don't let them drop all this down the memory hole. Go back and look. Remind yourself of how crazy and insane it was for months and months and months and months and months. And then as time went on, most reasonable people that have eyes in their head and actually leave their house every once in a while, they got it through hey, this could be bad if I have other conditions, and so I should probably take precautions. But if I don't have those conditions, I'm going to catch it and get sick for a couple of days and I'll be fine. And that was the case for 98% of the people that had COVID. Anyway, so March 2020, the whole world shuts down. I work for a defense contractor on a military base. And after a couple of weeks of us being home, they decided that we needed to come back to work because we have to keep the nation safe, apparently. And we were actually given these letters. I was trying to find the letter. The letter says, because remember, back in March 2020, it was very possible they were going to set up roadblocks, and they were going to set up all this crazy stuff to keep people from leaving, because apparently if you leave, the virus spreads. There were people talking about charging people with manslaughter or murder if they broke quarantine. I mean, you can just go back and think and look at the craziness, the insanity that gripped society and the world for a little while there. So in the middle of that, I'm told to go back to work, right? So I'm given this letter to show to the police if I'm stopped by the police. And the letter says that I am critical to the national defense infrastructure and the security of the free world. I've got the letter somewhere. I scanned it and then the scan didn't take, but I've got the letter somewhere. And it's amazing. It makes it sound like I am, uh, single-handedly keeping the world running. So we went back to work, and I was glad to go back to work, and I didn't mind. But they made us. We had to pass all the silly tests. We had to take had our temperature taken out in the parking lot before we could go into the inside the gate. We had to wear masks all the time. We had to wash our hands every 5 minutes. They had a guy whose sole job was to walk around and wipe down all the doorknobs and wipe down the phones and wipe down the walls, every 2 hours or something like that. And we went to work and we worked that way, and it was kind of terrible. So you got this guy that's taking our temperature, who's not a doctor. He's got this temperature scanner thing that bought at Walmart, and he decides, and the reason he got the job is because he was the lowest ranking salary member. He decides whether or not you come to work that day. And if you have a fever, then they have to call some people, and you can't go in. You have to sit in the parking lot while these other people decide your fate, and they may send you home for 2 weeks, or they may not. It depends on it. It was handled differently every time. And this was the condition under we worked for months. So this is March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, and in December of 2020, I caught COVID. Like I said, was sick for a few days and was fine. So then, life rolls on as it does. And I'm scrolling back here to make sure I got the dates right. On September 9th of 2021, Executive Order 14042 was announced, in which everybody was supposed to go to COVID shot, and that was mandated by labor law and other stuff. So what we were told when that mandate came out, we were told by our employer that their lawyers, the corporate lawyers, were still sorting out what all this meant for us, and that more information would be coming. So that's September. October 11th, we got this email saying that all employees had to be certified vaccinated by December 8th or have an approved accommodation, including those at telework, to be in compliance. Be in compliance with Executive Order 14042 by December 8th, later changed to January 18th. You had to be either vaccinated or have an approved accommodation. Okay. So the corporation let us fill out accommodations, and I submitted my accommodation on October 19th of 2021. Now, at this point, let me just say, at this point, I had known, 100 people probably that had COVID, a whole church full of people that had COVID. And at this point, I still believed that an amicable solution would be found. And I had no idea what was coming down the pike. And so what they did with us is they said that, first of all, when we filled out these religious accommodations, there's no criteria made available regarding these accommodations. There's nothing that told me what I should say, what I shouldn't say. I was talking to local management, so was everybody else, every day about what should I say, what are they looking for? And local management had no insight and what would or would not be acceptable. No information was made available about how the validity or sincerity of our beliefs would be assessed. At no point during the process did the people deciding who was some people in a some people on a diversity and inclusion board, some bunch of purple-haired trans walruses on a diversity and inclusion board. They were the ones making this decision about whether or not I have a job. And at no point did they seek any clarification on any point or give me any feedback at all. And so during that time period between when we submitted, and I'll just go ahead and spoiler here for you, all of our accommodations, all of us that put them in, they were all rejected. And they said that their reasoning was we work in this certain set of buildings, and the certain set of buildings occasionally interfaced with the military, which we didn't, but that's okay. This certain set of buildings regularly interfaced with the military, according to them, according to the purple-haired trans walruses, I guess. And so as a result, they could not grant us an accommodation. We either had to get the shot or we would not be allowed to come back to work. But in the meantime, between October and December, when they finally rejected the thing, it's very fluid. It seemed like every day there was new rules and new protocols and new confusion. And the company required us to go onto their website and certify our vaccination status. And I said, well, at least they will guard our information according to HIPAA. Well, if you dig a little bit deeper into HIPAA, HIPAA does not bind your company. It binds your doctor. And so, okay, fine. So it's not bound by the same HIPAA rules as a healthcare provider. But their corporate policy still was that, quote, every measure would be taken to safeguard our employee medical privacy. Now, there's a couple of instances that happened during all that where they weren't doing that. They weren't doing that because everybody and his brother knew who was vaccinated and who wasn't. They knew us several different ways. First of all, there was a list of us that weren't vaccinated. Third of all, they made all of us that were not vaccinated wear masks, because that way you could just look at us and see us. I remember one time these corporate bigwigs came down to the building where I work at, and they were going to give some speech about rah, 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 aren't we the best thing ever? And the manager of the building I work in came to me and said, listen, when these bigwigs come down, you better have your mask on because they know you're not vaccinated. They've got a list of people and they've got your picture and they're looking for people that aren't vaccinated. Well, to me, if everybody and his brother knows I'm not vaccinated, then they're not safeguarding my medical information. Anyway, so that was October. I filled out the paperwork, right? It had not been rejected yet. On November 17th, OSHA suspended the enforcement of the vaccine mandates. And December 2nd, 2021, the local union and our corporation put together this document about how we're going to proceed forward with this vaccine and what we're going to do about people that don't have the shot. But none of us had a copy of this, but that was when they started putting the thing together. In December 7th, a U.S. District Court judge halted the federal mandate for all employees of federal contractors. And we sat around and breathed a sigh of relief. Because since we were federal contractors, it seemed obvious to me, at least, that we were safe. On December 8th, the day after that U.S. District Judge halted the federal mandate, my accommodation request was denied, along with dozens of others, in this big sweeping form letter. And no process of appeal was offered, no explanation was given as to what this meant in light of the recent court ruling. And so what we said, talking amongst ourselves, is, well, they denied these the day after the court decision because we don't need these anymore. The court decision has made this accommodation form null and void or a moot point, and so that's what's going on. And we certainly didn't expect the company was going to move forward with what they moved forward with. December 9th, the Office of Management and Budget issued guidance on how to proceed in the light of recent court orders. And the memo says, quote, the government will take no action to enforce the clause implementing requirements of Executive Order 14042 absent further written notice from the agency. So at this point, here we are, December 9th, right? I have an OSHA mandate that says we're not going to do this. I have a U.S. District Court judge that says we're not going to do this. And I have the Office of Bureau of Management and Budget that says we're not going to do this. December 15th, that's 4 days later, we got an email that said, following a ruling by a U.S. District Court judge, the federal government's Safer Federal Workforce Task Force informed government contractors that it will not enforce the vaccine mandate in the President's September executive order. Now, we took that as good news. Now, so think about this. At this point, we had two court rulings, the Supreme Court and the federal court, a memo from OMB, a position of non-enforcement from OSHA, and a corporate email telling us that the mandate would not be enforced. Well, December 16th, we got an email from our local management saying that even though the federal government was not enforcing the mandate, the local CEO of the military establishment would be. So I began to have a conversation, active dialogue, as they like to say in the corporate world, with local management about what measures I could take to, proactively ensure workplace safety and continue working. About that time, I also filed a complaint with the Equal Opportunity Employment Commission or Council, whatever called EEOC, whatever that stands for, violated by not granting me my religious accommodation, for just denying it for no reason, that my company had actually violated my civil rights. Now, by now this is December. By now we'd worked over a year with masks and enhanced sanitation practices and social distancing, and it was difficult, but we could keep doing it while these issues were sorted out in the court. And those talks with my management turned out to be absolutely a waste of my time and their time. management just didn't have the authority to function that way because somebody somewhere had decided you're either going to have the shot or you're going to go out the door. And the situation was evolving so rapidly with so many bureaucracies involved that no one could even keep up, let alone get ahead of it. So we knew that at some point we would either have to get the shot or we'd be out the door. On January 9th, the United States Supreme Court blocked the enforcement of the vaccine mandate for private companies. So we've got an OSHA mandate canceled. We got federal court cases blocking it. We've got OSHA to sit and decide not to enforce it. And we've got the United States Supreme Court saying that private companies cannot enforce this mandate. January 10th, the very next day, the CDC Director Rochelle Walensky stated publicly that COVID vaccines do not prevent transmission. So that means that me, as an unvaccinated person, I am no more of a danger to anybody than a vaccinated person. In fact, I would say that I'm in a better position because I've got tons of antibodies. But here we are. We have all this stuff on one side of the equation, and then we have one thing saying, you got to get the shot. January 13th, 2022, unvaccinated personnel who had filed accommodations received an email informing us that we would be required to have vaccines or be barred access to the work site. This email allowed us to test January 17th, and assuming the test was negative, we'd be allowed to work until January 20th, which was normally the end of our work week. I actually was allowed to come in on the 21st and work overtime, even though the following Monday I would not even be allowed in the building. So we were told on January 14th by our local management that for purposes of unemployment insurance, we were not quitting, and nor were we being fired. We were being put on a 26-week-long unpaid involuntary leave of absence. We're given no options to transfer and no way to appeal. This leave of absence would be treated like a revocation of a security clearance, although my security clearance was never revoked. And we also were told we'd be eligible for unemployment once our paid time off, PTO, ran out. So they threw together another agreement between the union and the company, and they signed that January 18th. And I'm trying to explain how to explain best what happened next. So I have these badges I have to use to get on base to where I work. I have a bunch of them. Every badge gets me into a different area. And we were told on January 20th, I was told to be ready, that at any moment I'd be escorted off the campus and to a processing site where my badges would be confiscated. This never happened. I left that day with just as much access as I ever had. All I had really telling me not to come to work was this email on January 13th that saying I would not be allowed on site. In fact, some of my fellow unvaccinated workers, there was about 60 or 70 of us. They tried to show up Monday morning. They were threatened with having naval security remove them. But they also left with their badges and their accesses intact. It's weird that they said that the command was barring us access under the CO's badging authority, but the things that grant us physical access remained activated and in our possession. Now, while I'm not being allowed to come to work, Department of Navy personnel who were unvaccinated were allowed to continue to report to work in the same building that I was not allowed to work in. So anyway, on January 21st, 22, while I was working overtime in a building I would no longer be allowed to work in on Monday, U.S. District Court for the Southern District of Texas issued an injunction against the enforcement of the vaccine mandate, which includes the Department of the Navy. Well, that's great and that's good, but as of the afternoon of the 21st, I was no longer allowed to come into work. So the following Monday, after we were no longer allowed access, January 27th, 2022, the commanding officer of the base sent an email to the DoD civilians under his authority, and the email says, due to a recent federal court ruling on the legality of Executive Order 14043, which mandates vaccines for federal employees and contractors, we have paused all medical and religious reasonable accommodation requests and disciplinary actions for unvaccinated civil service personnel at this time. So I couldn't come to work, but everybody that still was allowed to come to work would still be allowed to come to work. The courts had told them to stop, and so they did, but I was still barred from accessing the job site. And so for the next several weeks, I struggled to pay bills and keep appraised of any changes. I filed for unemployment. My unemployment was denied. It was fought by the company that told me they weren't going to fight it. The Department of Labor, they were told by my company that I'd quit. During the entire time I was off, I was not contacted by HR at all, although I reached out to them by phone, email several times. I was not once contacted by union representatives. No one offered me any direction, any update. No offer of transfer was made available to me. No jobs were offered to me. Okay? So I'm sitting at the house, zero income, 6 mouths to feed. And the people that should have had my back didn't. I'd filed this complaint with the EEOC, but their government lawyers, they're taking forever. Anyway, February 10th, while I was still at home, 2022, an email was sent out by the CO, which reads, in part, that all future jobs would no longer require, I could read you the whole email, but it's just a bunch of legalese, that future hires would not be required to get the vaccine. They actually went in and changed the job requirements, changed the job descriptions to not include the vaccine because it was all blocked, it was all banned. But I was not allowed to come to work. February 18th, 2022, a union grievance was filed on my behalf and without my input or my knowledge. I'm not a union member. I don't attend meetings. This grievance was filed, I'm pretty sure, on the behalf of the entire group of employees that were barred access by the mandates. The company position paper seems to say that by filing an EEOC or by appealing to the union, I lost the ability to file an EEOC claim, but my EEOC claim predates the union grievance. I actually found out about the union grievance just a handful of days before it was declined. So I'm sitting at the house still, while people that also don't have the vaccine continue to go to work. So in mid-March, I heard through a former supervisor about an open position in a building that didn't require a vaccine. And I knew the hiring manager, I knew the boss, I knew the manager, I knew everybody over there. I applied and personally contacted him. I worked for this guy in the past, and I made my case to him directly. I also talked a lot to the communicator, the corporate recruiter, to make this happen. And so I got picked back up. Before I was actually terminated, and I was off work for 2.5 months. No favors were done for me. I was the best candidate for the job. So moving forward, like I said, late March, I applied for a job in a building that didn't require a vaccine. I got the job. So for months and months and months, the way that worked is I would show up to work on Monday morning and I would test for COVID. All us unvaccinated people would test for COVID. And if we tested negative, I was considered cleared to work the rest of the week. Okay. All the paperwork was weird. My pay was screwed up. It was a mess. And the people that were vaccinated did not have to get tested for COVID, even though they kept catching COVID. In fact, I don't think anybody out of our group ever caught COVID again. So in late February, in March, I was actually interviewed by the EEOC, and there's a whole process and all that's slow and painful, and you go days and days without knowing what's going to happen next. But in late February of 2023, I was contacted by the EEOC, and they said that they would not be pursuing my case. That they did not say I didn't have a case. They said that they would not be pursuing my case. And my best chance, my best hope. Here's what I was suing for. I want my back pay. That's all I want. I could have come to work. There are other people that did come to work. I want my back pay. I want my PTO restored. I want my back pay that I would have worked. I want the overtime I would have worked. I want my 401k contributions. I want all those things that I would have gotten, but I didn't get because I couldn't come to work. So the EEOC issued me a right to sue. I don't know if you know how this works, but they issue a right to sue, which means they're not saying you don't have a case, but they are issuing you a right to sue, which you can now go out in town and get you a lawyer. And we'd had a lawyer during all this. And you can get a lawyer, and that lawyer can file a lawsuit on your behalf in federal court. Okay? So I started working the phones. Our lawyer said, look, I'm retiring, and I don't file federal lawsuits. He said, but you're not going to have a problem finding someone who will file a lawsuit on your behalf. He said, just go to them, say, look, I'm trying to get this money back. There's a bunch of us, et cetera, et cetera. He said, they'll ask him to do it on a contingency basis. He says, and they'll file it. And he says, in my opinion, this is my lawyer saying this. He says, this is slam dunk. You get this in front of a jury, and you present your case the way we've had it all the way, and you provide this documentation about how there was no justification given for any of this stuff that happened. He says, you do that and get this in front of a jury and you'll get paid. Okay. I said, do you have anyone you can recommend? And he gave me a list of names. I called those people. Those people all declined to help me. I asked those people, do you have anyone you can recommend? And from that, I pulled about another 20 or 30 names. I called all those people. Some of them didn't call me back. Some of them took me on, then dropped me. All sorts of things happened. But at every stage of the game, before I exhausted a list of lawyers, I asked for a list of their recommendations. So 20, 30, 40 lawyers down the line here, I can't find anybody to represent me for a wide variety of reasons. And I'll get into those reasons here in a minute. But meanwhile, the clock is ticking because the right to sue that's issued to you by the EEOC has a expiration date on it. It is 90 days from when they make that decision to give you to release you and give you the right to sue out in town. So you've got 90 days to file a lawyer or to find a lawyer and file a federal lawsuit, or your right to sue goes away and you're just out. And another thing, out of our group that went out the door, none of us knew what to do. No one gave us any instruction. No one gave us any help. We were on our own, and we were all throwing different patches of mud at the wall and communicating with each other to try to figure out what's the best way to go forward. So some of us filed EEOC complaints and some of us didn't. And apparently, if you did not file an EEOC complaint, you have no legal standing, because when you get to federal court's the last step of the process. The EEOC is the first step of the process, and when the judge sees that you did not take the first step, he's not going to let you take the last step. He's going to dismiss your case. So I had at least done one thing right. I'd filed an EEOC complaint, but now I've got this clock running. And I'm calling lawyers, and I'm emailing lawyers, and I'm sending my documentation, because I've got all this documentation. I'm sending all over creation. And at every level, I'm getting a new list of lawyers. Well, at one point, I'm told by somebody, go to the Georgia State Bar Association, and there is a list of lawyers there, and you type in these search parameters, it'll give you a list of lawyers. And that gave me a list of, I think, another 45 lawyers. And so I sat here on several days when I had a day off, and I would call and call and call, and over and over and over again, I would lay out the bare bones of my situation, because at this point I'm on my own, right? There's no group thing. There's no what they call it, class action thing, unless we all had our EEOC thing, and we didn't all have our EEOC things. So I'm on my own, and I'm calling these lawyers, and I'm saying, can you represent me on a contingency basis? Here's the situation. Here's the amount of money I'm looking at. Da 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 da. And over and over and over again, I was turned down. And I had guys say, oh, yeah, we're going to do this. Woohoo, we're going to fight. We love fights like this. And then after about a week and a half, they'd say, I'm sorry, we can't help you. And I couldn't figure out what was going on. So about a week and a half ago, I actually had a rather lengthy conversation with a lawyer he said, I'm not going to represent you. And let me tell you why I'm not going to represent you. He said, you're looking for this amount. He said, I've been doing this a long time, and this case will cost about $125,000 to pursue. He said, that's what it costs. He said, so even if I get that money back, even if we do this on a contingency basis and we sue your employer, who is your employer, by the way, and they're not going to care very much for being sued while you're still on the clock. He said, but anyway, he says, and let's say we're successful, and I get my $125,000 back that I got to put into it, and you get your back pay you're looking for. He says, we're going to spend years in court, and I'm going to spend hours and hours, hundreds and hundreds of hours on your case to get back this very, very small amount. Meanwhile, the corporation we are fighting has unlimited resources. He said, I wish it wasn't that way, but that's why people are turning you down. They're not telling you that, but that's why they're turning it down. I said, well, I appreciate your honesty. So he said, okay, well, so a lot of lawyers I talked to, they wanted a bunch of money up front, which I don't have. I'm a guy who works a job, and I got 6 mouths to feed, and went without pay for months, and we're all that great stuff went on. And then the price of everything doubled because of inflation, and we're just, here we are, right? And God provides, but we don't have any extra money. So when a man says, I'll talk to you on the phone for $450 an hour, I can't play that game. And if he's going to charge me $450 an hour, the amount of money that I'm trying to get back quickly gets swallowed up by what it's costing me. So yesterday I contacted the last couple of lawyers who gave me a name of another couple of lawyers who gave me a name of a lady in California, who gave me a name of a lady in New Jersey, who said she's got a friend who knows a guy who might be able to represent me. That's what we're looking at. So if you're hearing this, that deadline for me to file that lawsuit has already passed while I'm waiting on someone to call me back. And let me tell you what I think happened. I think a lot of things happened. I think the system failed me. The company that claims all the time how our people are the number one thing, and we're one big family here at this company, they kicked me to the curb, and they lied about me, and they denied me my most basic rights. The union that claims they represent me didn't even try. They threw up their hands at the first sense of opposition and just done. And told me I have to actually subpoena them to get the information they had about me and their interactions between me and the company regarding me. So they failed me. And then the justice system failed me. Because there's a bunch of lawyers in this country that aren't doing it because it's right. They're doing it because, and I get you can't do things for free, but apparently a big factor in whether or not a lawyer takes a case is how deep are my pockets. And so what it winds up being is you can get as much justice as you can afford. And I couldn't afford very much. And nobody, even the groups that say we're fighting for the little guy, this one person I called, their tagline is, "We are your legal gladiator." And they wanted $450 an hour to talk to me on the phone before we did anything. I was up front. So, what I have to do within myself is I have to find some way to process all this. I have to go forward. One of the reasons I came back to work at my company was I didn't want to move, and there's not a whole lot else going on in this town. And second of all, I have a pension there, and if I walk away, I lose my pension. So I came back. I found another position. I came back, but man, I'm a different guy going out or coming back than I was going out, and I'm trying not to be bitter. I'm trying not to be mad. But I've seen a very ugly side of the corporate world. I've seen a very indifferent side of the corporate world. I've seen how tyranny works and how the little guy gets squished by the big guy, and people want to pretend that this didn't happen. Now, I came back after 2.5 months. There was another person that came back after about 6 months. There was another person that came back about 8 months in. There were people that came back a year later. But they lost everything. Some of them were terminated and not brought back. And so there are people that have worked there a decade or more, that because we would not get a shot, that A, no one knew what it did, but B, everybody knew the one thing it didn't do was stop COVID, because we would not put things in our body that we did not have confidence in. We were treated as a threat. We were treated as lepers. And we were denied the ability to come to work and feed our family, while other people who also did not have a vaccine were allowed to come to work. So none of it's fair. And I get, the world's not fair. You're right, the world's not fair. But knowing that the world is not fair is not the same thing as being okay with the world not being fair. You ought to be outraged at injustice, and injustice happens every day, and it ought not surprise you, but you ought not be happy about it, and you ought not be indifferent to it. So if you're hearing this, it is because my case turned into a pumpkin, and I have no more legal redress. and I have to just eat the money that I lost. And at least for now, continue to work at a place that I no longer respect. I believe in the mission. I believe in what we do. I believe what we do is a good thing. Maybe not always the way we do it, but what we do is a good thing. The things I work on make you, my American friend, safer. I believe that. I don't believe that's true of every Defense Department program. I don't believe that's true of most Defense Department programs. But I believe the one that we work on, I believe it does that. And so I try to take solace in that, and I try to take solace in the fact that I'm commanded in Scripture to feed my family, and this does allow me to feed my family. Past that, man, I don't know. It's rough. I'm being as honest with you as I know how. It's rough because I feel like the people that were supposed to come to our defense did not, on several levels. At the end of the day, a handful of people made trillions and trillions of dollars and got their backs scratched and got their wallets padded and did this unprecedented social experiment of mass compliance. What are you going to do? You know? Anyway, so since I don't know, 70 lawyers or so have heard this story, I figured it wouldn't hurt for you to hear it too. And if my case has already turned into a pumpkin, obviously, and I haven't named any names, I've been vague on purpose. I can't see any repercussions or blowback from this. Everything I have said to you today has been already said to corporate, to lawyers, to judges, to, like I said, 65, 70 attorneys. I don't even know how many attorneys I called now. But in 90 days, I called all of them. I called every employment lawyer in the entire state of Georgia that is listed with the Georgia State Bar Association, and I came up with nobody that would defend us. So what does that tell you about your country? Well, like I said, this is the Street Preacher's Corner podcast. This is probably the least spiritual podcast we'll ever do. But since I have this very small audience, I figured you ought to know what's really going on out there in the world. And don't let them tell you that it did okay and that everybody got their money back. No, that's not what happened. That's not what happened at all. I'm Mike. This has been the Street Preacher's Corner podcast. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your attention. And I will see you on the other side.